Over 300 prophecies spoken by prophets centuries before his birth. Was Jesus of Nazareth truly the fulfillment of these divine predictions? Or have we misinterpreted history? Today we embark on a deep dive into the ancient texts to uncover the truth. Did Jesus fulfill all prophecies? To truly understand the weight of these prophecies, we must step back in time. Imagine yourself in ancient Israel, centuries before Jesus walked the earth. The people longed for a Messiah, a deliverer who would rescue them from oppression and establish a kingdom of righteousness. Prophets like Isaiah, Micah, and Daniel wrote about a coming figure who would change history forever. But who was he? And how would the people recognize him when he came? Fast forward to the time of Jesus. Some hailed him as the long-awaited Messiah, the fulfillment of every prophecy. Others rejected him, expecting a warrior king instead of a humble teacher. So how do we determine the truth? Were these ancient predictions truly fulfilled in Jesus, or are we missing something? The Bible contains over 300 prophecies about the Messiah, from his birth to his death, from his miracles to his resurrection, each foretold with astonishing detail. But fulfilling one or two prophecies could be coincidence. What are the odds of fulfilling hundreds? Mathematician Peter Stoner once calculated that the odds of one man fulfilling just 8 specific messianic prophecies is 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's a 1 followed by 17 zeros. And yet Jesus is said to have fulfilled not just 8, but hundreds. But before we draw conclusions, we need to ask, what exactly did these prophecies predict? How did early Jewish scholars interpret them? And most importantly, what does this mean for us today? Join me as we embark on this journey, a deep dive into history, scripture, and prophecy. Get ready because what we uncover might challenge everything you thought you knew. Before we examine specific prophecies, we must understand what prophecy truly is. The word prophecy often brings to mind images of fortune tellers or vague predictions. But biblical prophecy is something far greater. It is the revelation of divine truth, God's messages spoken through his chosen prophets. Throughout the Old Testament, prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel spoke on behalf of God. Their messages were not random predictions, but declarations of God's will, sometimes warnings, sometimes promises, and often pointing to a future hope, the Messiah. These prophetic words span over 1,000 years, from Moses to Malachi. Some of these prophecies had immediate fulfillments, like Israel's exile and return. Others, however, pointed far beyond their time, to a future figure who would change history forever. But how do we determine whether a prophecy is truly messianic? Scholars typically use 3 key criteria. 1. Context. Is the prophecy speaking about a coming deliverer? 2. Specificity. Does it give clear details that can be verified? 3. Fulfillment. Can we trace its fulfillment in history? In ancient times, Jewish scholars debated these texts, looking for signs of the Messiah. Some passages, like Isaiah 53, were clear in describing a suffering servant. Others, like Psalm 110, spoke of a conquering king. This dual picture led to centuries of expectation and confusion. By the time of Jesus, Israel was under Roman occupation. Many expected the Messiah to be a military leader who would overthrow their oppressors. But Jesus did not fit that image. Instead, he preached peace, healed the sick, and spoke of a kingdom not of this world. Yet when we look at the ancient texts, we find striking parallels between prophecy and Jesus' life. The virgin birth in Isaiah 7:14, the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, the crucifixion details in Psalm 22, the prophecy of resurrection in Hosea 6:2. Could it be that the Messiah was not what people expected, but exactly what was foretold? So was Jesus truly the fulfillment of these divine predictions? Or do the prophecies still point to another? As we move forward, we'll analyze key prophecies and their fulfillment, or lack thereof, in the life of Jesus. Stay with us because the answers may surprise you. Now let's examine some of the most significant prophecies. These passages, written centuries before Jesus, hold incredible details about the Messiah. We will analyze 1. The birthplace prophecy, Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. Micah's prophecy, written around 700 BC, foretold that the Messiah would come from the small town of Bethlehem. Fast forward to the New Testament, and we see Jesus' birth in this exact location, recorded in Matthew 2:1. Coincidence or divine fulfillment? It's important to note that Joseph and Mary were from Nazareth, not Bethlehem. The reason Jesus was born there was due to a Roman census requiring them to travel to Joseph's ancestral town. This event, beyond human control, perfectly aligned with prophecy. 2. The virgin birth, Isaiah 7:14. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. One of the most debated prophecies, Isaiah 7:14, speaks of a virgin giving birth to a son called Emmanuel, meaning God with us. Critics argue that the Hebrew word Alma can mean young woman rather than virgin. However, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, translates it as Parthenos, which unambiguously means virgin. According to the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, Mary was indeed a virgin when she conceived Jesus. If this prophecy is true, it marks an extraordinary supernatural event, setting Jesus apart from any other historical figure. 3. The suffering servant, Isaiah 53, a vivid depiction of a man who would be pierced for our transgressions. Isaiah 53 is often called the forbidden chapter because many Jewish communities do not include it in regular readings. Why? Because it presents an undeniable picture of a suffering figure who takes the sins of the people upon himself. Let's examine a few verses. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Isaiah 53:3. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Isaiah 53:5. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Isaiah 53:9. 9. Each of these descriptions aligns remarkably with Jesus' life, death, and burial. Crucifixion, a method of execution that involves piercing, was not even practiced when Isaiah wrote this. Yet Jesus was crucified and buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy man. The triumphal entry, Zechariah 9:9. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey. This prophecy, written over 500 years before Jesus, describes the Messiah entering Jerusalem humbly on a donkey. The Gospels record Jesus doing exactly this in Matthew 21:1-7, fulfilling Zechariah's words to the letter. Interestingly, this entry was not just a symbolic act. It was a direct declaration of Messianic kingship. The people recognized it and welcomed Jesus as the promised son of David. Transition graphic, the crucifixion foretold. 5. The crucifixion foretold, Psalm 22:16-18. They pierce my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. Psalm 22, written by King David around 1000 BC, describes a man suffering execution in a way that mirrors crucifixion. But here's the astonishing part. Crucifixion was not even a Jewish form of execution at the time. It was invented by the Persians and later adopted by the Romans. Matthew records this exact event, fulfilling the words of Psalm 22. Could David have merely been describing his own sufferings, or was he prophetically writing about the Messiah? We've examined just a handful of the prophecies, but already the connections are striking. These ancient words, written centuries before Jesus, seem to align perfectly with his life and mission. But here's the challenge. Could these fulfillments be coincidence? Could Jesus have intentionally staged his life to match these prophecies? Or is there undeniable evidence that he truly is the prophesied Messiah? In our next chapter, we'll tackle these questions head-on and explore some of the most debated prophecies. Stay with us, because the deeper we go, the more compelling the case becomes. Now that we've explored key Messianic prophecies, let's turn to some of the most debated ones. These prophecies raise challenging questions. Did Jesus truly fulfill them? Or were they misinterpreted or stretched to fit his life? One of the most intricate and debated prophecies regarding the Messiah is found in Daniel 9:24-27, often referred to as the 70 weeks prophecy. Many scholars believe it provides a timeline leading directly to Jesus' arrival and crucifixion. Daniel 9:25 speaks of a period of 7 weeks and 62 weeks until the coming of the Anointed One. Many interpret this as 483 prophetic years. According to some scholars' calculations, this timeline aligns with Jesus' entry into Jerusalem or his crucifixion. However, skeptics argue that the calculations depend on how one interprets prophetic years, 360-day years or standard solar years. Could this prophecy have been manipulated after Jesus' time? Some argue that early Christians retrofitted the timeline to fit Jesus. However, the Dead Sea Scrolls contain copies of Daniel predating Christ, proving this prophecy was written long before Jesus walked the earth. Whether one accepts this prophecy as proof of Jesus' messianic fulfillment or not, the precision of the timeline is fascinating and remains one of the strongest prophetic claims in favor of Jesus. Let's go back to the beginning, Genesis 3:15. This verse is often called the Proto-Evangelium, the first gospel message. The verse speaks of the seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head while the serpent bruises his heel. Many Christians interpret this as a messianic prophecy, pointing to Jesus' victory over Satan through his crucifixion and resurrection. However, Jewish interpretations often view this passage as a general struggle between good and evil, not specifically messianic. Jesus' death and resurrection could be seen as a fulfillment of this prophecy. His heel was bruised in his suffering, but he ultimately crushed the serpent by defeating sin and death. But does this passage explicitly point to Jesus, or is it a broader metaphor? Isaiah 9:6 is one of the most famous verses cited as proof of Jesus' divinity. For unto us a child is born, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Christians argue that calling the Messiah Mighty God confirms Jesus' divine nature. Jewish scholars counter that Mighty God can refer to a powerful ruler rather than literal divinity. Additionally, the phrase Everlasting Father raises questions. Jesus referred to God as the Father, but did not claim the title himself. Is this a prophecy of Jesus' divine nature, or could it have referred to a different ruler entirely? Psalm 110:1 is another key prophecy. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Jesus himself used this verse to challenge Jewish leaders, asking them how David could call his descendant Lord. Christians see this as evidence of Jesus' divine authority. Some Jewish interpretations, however, suggest my Lord refers to a respected human king rather than the Messiah. Is this a clear reference to Jesus' divine status, or could another interpretation be equally valid? Zechariah 12:10 is often quoted as a prophecy of Jesus' crucifixion. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. Christian scholars argue that this prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus was pierced on the cross. However, some Jewish scholars claim this refers to Israel mourning over a fallen leader rather than a crucified Messiah. Could this verse be a double prophecy, partially fulfilled in the past but awaiting a future fulfillment? So, what do we make of all these debated prophecies? Were they fulfilled by Jesus, or have they been stretched to fit his life? Some argue that Jesus could have intentionally fulfilled certain prophecies, like riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Others, such as his birthplace or method of execution, were beyond human control. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that these prophecies existed before Jesus, meaning they were not written after the fact. Skeptics will say that these fulfillments are mere coincidence, but statistically, the odds of one person fulfilling even a handful of these prophecies are astronomically low. Dr. Peter Stoner, a mathematician, calculated that the probability of one person fulfilling just 8 messianic prophecies is 1 in 100 quadrillion, and Jesus fulfilled far more than that. So we leave you with the question, did Jesus fulfill these ancient predictions by divine design? Or are we simply seeing patterns where we want to see them? The evidence is there. What will you decide? In this chapter, we examine how Jesus' fulfillment of prophecy shaped history, faith, and theological discourse. What does it mean for believers today, and how has it influenced Christianity through the centuries? The fulfillment of messianic prophecy by Jesus Christ was not just a theological milestone, it became the foundation for an entire religious movement. From the earliest days of the apostles to modern Christianity, The belief that Jesus fulfilled ancient prophecies has been central to Christian faith and evangelism. The apostles, particularly Peter and Paul, frequently use fulfilled prophecy to validate Jesus as the Messiah, Acts 2:14-36, Acts 13:16-41. The Gospel of Matthew was written with a strong emphasis on prophecy fulfillment, aimed at a Jewish audience. Early Christian apologists, such as Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, defended the faith by citing prophecies about Jesus. The argument that Jesus fulfilled messianic prophecies was so powerful that it became a primary method of preaching in the early church. The apostles constantly referred back to Scripture to prove their case, showing that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection aligned perfectly with what had been foretold. The belief that Jesus fulfilled prophecy helped Christianity spread beyond Jewish communities into the Gentile world. The destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70 further convinced many that Jesus' prophetic warnings, Matthew 24:1-2, were true. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, prophecy fulfillment was used to distinguish Jesus from other religious figures. By the time Christianity became the dominant faith of the Roman Empire, the idea that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah had shaped the theological identity of the church. But the impact of prophecy did not stop there. Throughout the Middle Ages, prophecy continued to be a tool for theological teaching and apologetics. The Protestant Reformation saw renewed emphasis on prophecy, especially regarding the second coming of Christ. Reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin highlighted fulfilled prophecy as evidence for the reliability of Scripture. From the Catholic Church to Protestant reformers, prophecy remained a crucial aspect of Christian doctrine. It reassured believers that God's plan was unfolding exactly as foretold. In modern times, Christian apologists continue to use prophecy as a defense of the faith. The rise of Messianic Judaism, where Jewish believers in Jesus accept him as the Messiah, is often rooted in studying Messianic prophecies. Scholars and theologians debate the deeper meanings of these prophecies, while skeptics continue to challenge their interpretations. Even today, the debate over prophecy fulfillment continues. Some see it as irrefutable proof of divine intervention, while others claim that prophecies are vague or open to interpretation. Regardless, the impact of these prophecies has been profound. For many believers, the study of prophecy strengthens personal faith and deepens trust in Scripture. Understanding prophecy fulfillment leads to a greater appreciation of God's sovereignty and His plan for humanity. Prophecy also plays a key role in discussions about the return of Christ and the end times. For the believer, fulfilled prophecy is not just a historical fact, it is a confirmation of God's divine orchestration. It gives confidence that Jesus was who He claimed to be and that His promises will continue to unfold. So what does all this mean for us today? The question remains, did Jesus fulfill all messianic prophecies? And if so, what does that mean for our faith, our worldview, and our future? While we have examined the prophecies that many believe Jesus fulfilled, what about the ones that some say remain unfulfilled? Are there messianic prophecies still awaiting completion? And if so, what do they mean for our understanding of Jesus? Some scholars believe certain prophecies have a dual fulfillment, one partial fulfillment in Jesus' first coming and a complete fulfillment in His second coming. Prophecies such as Isaiah 9:7, which speaks of an eternal kingdom with justice and righteousness, are often cited as examples. Many Christians believe that Jesus' return will bring about the full realization of these promises. Could it be that some prophecies were only partially fulfilled, that Jesus came to establish a spiritual kingdom first and will later establish a physical one? In Judaism, the Messiah is expected to bring universal peace and restore the temple. Some argue that Jesus did not accomplish these tasks, and therefore, He could not be the promised Messiah. Christian theology, however, suggests that these will be fulfilled in Jesus' second coming. Jewish expectations of the Messiah often emphasize political and earthly restoration, while Christianity focuses on spiritual fulfillment. This difference has led to centuries of debate. This passage describes a future time of perfect peace where the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. Some argue that this has not yet happened, meaning the Messianic age is still to come. Others interpret it metaphorically, representing the peace Jesus brought between God and humanity. Is this prophecy to be understood literally, or is it a spiritual reality that Jesus has already brought? Some prophecies, such as Ezekiel's vision of a restored temple, have led to speculation about a future rebuilding in Jerusalem. While some see this as a literal prophecy yet to be fulfilled, others believe Jesus himself replaced the need for a physical temple. Jesus referred to his body as the temple, John 2:19-21, implying that the need for a physical temple was no longer necessary. But does this mean the prophecy was fulfilled symbolically? The book of Revelation describes Jesus returning in glory, fulfilling remaining messianic expectations. Many Christians believe that this will complete the prophecies not yet seen in history. Could it be that the final chapter of prophecy is still unfolding? That Jesus has fulfilled part of the plan, but will return to bring it to completion? So are there truly unfulfilled prophecies, or are they simply waiting for their time? The answer may depend on our understanding of Jesus' mission and God's timeline. One thing is certain: the prophecies of the Messiah continue to spark discussion, inspire faith, and point us toward the future. To stay updated for more information on Bible stories, hit the like, share, and subscribe button below.